Good morning. Barry Bryson here. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. We're continuing our study of the Ten Commandments with the second commandment, and we'll be reading from the book of Exodus, chapter 20, and I'm going to be reading verses 3 through 6. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above or on earth beneath or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. Of course, we're following, as we said early on, the Jewish numbering, the traditional Jewish numbering of the commands. In some ways, the commands are numbered. I've just read Numbers 2 and 3, or 1 and 2, excuse me. But this prohibition against idolatry and of making an image of an idol to worship is of the 10 the one that the children of Israel had the hardest time keeping. In fact, most of their other transgressions are folded into this. And it's amazing how quickly they began worshiping other gods. Joshua told them to put away the gods that they had in Egypt, meaning that some of them had held on to the gods that they worshipped in Egypt. At the end of Joshua, they failed to exterminate the pagans, the idolaters from the promised land, but let them live among them and pollute their religion with the idolatrous religions of Dagon and Molech and Baal, particularly Baal, that we call Baal, pronounced Baal, almost anyway, pronounced that way. And those people, as we read the book of Judges, then would dominate them because their religion was not pure. They would run afoul of God. He said, if you practice idolatry, I'm not going to favor you in any way. In fact, you're going to pay the consequences for your idolatry. And they even turned their worship of God into idolatry itself. There's a wonderful verse in 2 Kings chapter 18 talking about Hezekiah being, in a way, the greatest of all the kings of Israel, doing things even David did not do. And it says in 2 Kings chapter 18 verse 4, he removed the high places, broke down the sacred pillars, cut down the Asherah, and broke into pieces the bronze serpent that Moses made, for until those days the sons of Israel burned incense to it, and it was called Nehushtan. Nehushtan means the piece of bronze. But this goes back to Numbers 21, when the people were afflicted, with snake bites because they had intermingled with the people of the land, and that bronze serpent was still there that Moses himself had fashioned, and the people all through the history of their time in the land had been offering incense to this thing that God had given, had instructed Moses to make to heal them from their diseases, but not to use as an idol to worship, and yet they were doing it. And the first person who had the guts to destroy this piece of history, this relic of the past that was made by the hands of Moses, was Hezekiah himself. And so they just so tended towards idolatry. In fact, while Moses was on the mountain receiving the Ten Commandments from the hand of God, we know the story. They pressured Aaron to fashion for them a golden calf that they then began to worship. What is the point of this? We need someone to worship, and one of the reasons we need someone to worship is because the world is a frightening place, and a place that we have little control over. We don't have control over the weather, the forces of nature, and we are exposed. And they had an understanding of that more clearly than we do, having found emoluments, against the elements. And we've come to have the hubris of thinking that we can just, abuse the earth that God has given to us, and there will be no price to pay. But they had no control over the flow of rivers, over the effects of weather, and so they needed some way to feel powerful, and to have some control. It's ultimately about the money. It's ultimately Baal is a storm god. I mean, it's just this simple. Baal is the god of the storm. Asherah is the goddess of the earth. The rain is seen as penetrating the earth and making it fertile and making things grow. And so that's what Baal worship is about. It's about agricultural production, and about enriching people through their agricultural production, whether it's the animals that you own or the produce of the field. And that's what Baal worship was about. And so it was attractive, to the people. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 6, when he's talking about the prayers of the Gentiles, he says they think they will be heard by their repetition of words. In other words, the prayer to idols, by these idolatrous, these pagan people, is a way of using incantations and spells to control, that the divine realm, to control what is beyond you. God is not to be controlled. God is our God, and if we worship him and are humble ourselves before him, and are faithful to him, he will bless us. And that's the covenant that he makes with his people. And it's not to be, you can't bargain, you can't make deals, you can't cut deals, you can't find ways to game the system, you can't say the right number of words in the right order to control things. And it's still to this day about the money, because Jesus tells us in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 6, no man can serve two masters. He'll either love one and hate the other, cling to the one and despise the other. You can't serve God and money. And Paul himself says in Colossians chapter 3, verse 5, that greed is idolatry. And so it's still about the money, and we still have our own idols that we worship. One more thing that I want to mention about idolatry, and I know I'm way over my time, and it's a wonderful passage from Isaiah 44, and I'll just not read it because it's a longer passage, but I'll call your attention to it, particularly verses 12 through 17, where he describes the process of a man cutting down a tree, and he uses some of it to fashion, a bowl for his food, and he uses some of it to burn, to cook that food, and then with the other piece of the tree, he carves an idol and he bows down. He says, "My Lord and my God," and talks about how utterly ridiculous it is and laughable it is to think that you have control over the divine. That's the point, and that's what God is prohibiting, and that's why this is really the longest section, because it's the thing they had the most problem with. And God had to send them into captivity to cure them of their idolatry, Babylonian captivity. They had to go back into captivity again to be purged of this. Well, we'll talk about taking the Lord's name in vain next time. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes.